I'm really excited to welcome Rabbi Irwin Zeplowitz. Welcome back, Rabbi Irwin Zeplowitz, because you
Thank
taught
you.
us a few months ago. Although I wasn't here the last time, so I'm glad to be able to be here to learn from you today. Rabbi Zeplowitz is a retired rabbi in the Berkshires, although the way he put it when I asked him was in his encore and loving it. So you're making me jealous, Rabbi Zeplowitz, of what is to come. I'm gonna just turn things right over to him because we have a lot to get through. Let me invite you to join me in the blessing for study. So if you feel comfortable, let's unmute and we'll say this blessing together, and then we'll jump right into our discussion about the hopeful message of the Pesach Seder. Please join me. Baruch
Baruch
atah
atah Adonai,
Eloheinu melech
Eloheinu melech
haolam,
haolam,
asher
asher
kitshanu
kitshanu
mitzvotav
v'tzivanu
b'Yisrael
b'Yisrael
Torah.
b'lei Torah.
Blessed is the Eternal, whose mitzvot, whose commandments bring us holiness, and who commands us to immerse, to engage in words of Torah. Rabbi Zeplowitz, take it away.
Well, first of all, shalom, everybody, and a very
Shalom.
happy Nisan. This is actually the beginning of the Jewish year, at least according to one calendar system. And so, Happy New Year, Shana Tova. It is in some ways much more rational, given the way that the climate works in Israel, that this would be the beginning of the year in some ways, because this is the season when the winter rains are dying down and the new beginning is happening, and it also is related to Pesach. So it's really happy to be with you, especially on this real special this special Chag of Rosh Chodesh, and to be with you today. So, really quickly, if you could put into the chat, what do you think is the purpose of the Seder? And it has to be literally like no more than 4 or 5 words. Like if you give the elevator speech, what's the reason we have a Seder? Just put it in the chat really quickly, if you can. If somebody never had been to the Seder, so like, why are you doing this? Okay, bring loved ones together. Remember the Exodus. Okay, like the matzah. Okay. Any other thoughts? The whole purpose of the Seder. Remember redemption. Apply it to today. Okay. Okay. Remember the Exodus. Telling the story to remember, watch. Okay. Perfect. Good. So I am going to make an argument today. I'm going to push us a little bit. I actually believe that the purpose of the Seder from the rabbis of blessed memory, it's not to actually remember. It is to be. And I'm going to ask Rabbi Streifer to pull up the sheet. Some of you have it. I'm going to give it to you actually on. Let's see if I can find it on my. Let me see if I can. Yeah, that's great. You have a PDF, so if you want to download the PDF as well,
I'll drop it
Micah.
in the chat in just a minute. Actually,
Yeah,
yes, I'm going to drop it in the chat now.
yeah. So if you could just drop it into the chat, and then you can pull it up and take this yourself. If you actually take a look, the purpose is, and we're going to come back to this at the beginning of the Seder, is um, established in the Talmud in Psachim 116b, that it's true that we have to thank and glorify and do all these, like, oh, you're so mighty, oh, you're so wonderful, oh, thank you, thank you, thank you to God. Why? Who brought us, and the Hebrew here is me'avdut lecherut, me'agon lesimcha, me'eva leyom tov, me'afela leor gadol, mishu'abad legeula. So, who brought us from oppression or degradation to freedom, from yagon is kind of moaning and kvetching and sadness, despair, to happiness, from um, from mourning to a Yom Tov, a good day, from the darkness to a great light, and from oppression to redemption. So that's all true. But one of the things that I think, in many ways, the whole purpose of the Seder actually is absolutely related to Tikvah. It is related to hope. That it is a experiential and pedagogical uh, exercise to try to get us to feel it. Why is it that we're not just talking about remembering? Because it says in the Haggadah itself that we ourselves are supposed to feel ourselves Ki'ilu hu yatsa mimitzrayim, as if we ourselves are actually going out of Egypt. This is not to remember the slaves of long ago. It is to remember the Egypt, the narrowness, which is a understanding of Mitzrayim, from tsar, from narrow. Mitzrayim, it was called Egypt because of the narrowness of the Nile, the life that was there in that narrow valley between the deserts. And how is it that we are supposed to, both as a on a national scale and on an individual scale, begin by feeling, not as if we are supposed to remember the slaves, but to be the slaves. We are to feel that we are constricted. How do we feel and recognize our grief? And how does the Seder move us from that both physical sense of servitude as well as spiritual to something where we can feel something more? And I'm going to talk about the ways that I think the Seder does it at the beginning. So let me just ask again, you can either unmute yourself or just put in the chat. Um, what do you eat at the beginning of the Seder? Just unmute yourself and just say it, or just put it in the chat. What's the first thing beyond the Kiddush wine? But what's the first thing that we eat? The parsley. Oh, that's a wonderful sense of freedom, right? You get a verstunken a little piece of parsley, you dip it into the salt water. And so if you actually think about it, I don't know about your Seder table, but our Seder table, my wife and I are cooking for oftentimes or um, weeks in advance, preparing for weeks in advance. The beginning of the Seder is with limited choices and meager foods. And it's very constricted and very regulated. So here's what you eat now. Here's what you deepen this. And what do you get? You get like a a taste of something. Whereas later on, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. There's a sense about what it is that you're supposed to eat. Pardon me. But my guess is that at your Seder table, the the foods are plentiful and overflowing, and there's so much. And again, this is to move us from a sense of we're constrained by the choices that we have at the beginning to a sense of a bounty of opportunities and choices that we have later on that we'll talk to. If Rabbi Streifer, you would pull down to the actual Seder plate. Some of you who actually can see this Seder plate, you can make it maybe a little bigger on the page. This may look a little different. There's something on here that oftentimes when I was growing up was not on the Seder plate. Is there anything that seems a little different from the Seder plate that you are used to? You can put it in the chat, or you can unmute yourself and just say what it is. Yep, Jacqueline, lettuce. I also didn't grow up with lettuce. So why these particular items? Um, and again, why do we have the shank bone? It's the specific Pesach offering, the roasted egg. It's the offering for the holiday itself. But then there's these other items. So karpas is, and we're going to take a look at the chazeret, the lettuce, connected to the bitter herbs, and then, of course, the haroset as we go through. So, why lettuce? In part because largely because if and this I didn't give you the text itself, but if you want to write this down and look it up on your own, in the Mishnah, chapter 10, verse 3, it specifically mentions chazeret. This is actually, it's not parsley that's supposed to be on the table, on the plate, I should say. It's, yes, a spring, but it is actually lettuce. Why lettuce? Anybody who's a gardener, and Rabbi Streifer and I were just talking about beginning our gardens, lettuce, because romaine lettuce, anybody who grows lettuce knows that when lettuce first comes out, and if you go to the store, you want to buy baby greens because the baby greens are sweet. But what happens with lettuce when things get hot? It bolts and it becomes very bitter. It becomes really almost unpalatable. And so it, in a sense, is a perfect it's a perfect, it can be sweet or bitter, right? As Sarah has said. Lettuce is the perfect paradigm for slavery itself. When we first went into Egypt, it was sweet. And when we often come into a country, we think things are going to be great here. This country is going to be different. I'm not talking about right now, although maybe it is. And maybe that question to ask at the Seder, is this the best of times or is this the worst of times? Are things moving in a positive direction or a negative direction? And one of the things is that when we get into a country without the capacity to be able to determine our own choices, that's what freedom means. That's why you know, Israel becomes so important to many people. If we make choices and they're bad choices, at least they're our choices. And so it seems to be, oh, I like this greener on the other side. Um, but the possibility and the problem with arugula is always bitter. And so I think the chazeret for the rabbis was something that began sweet and something that later on becomes bitter. Now, what's interesting is why do we did the tradition of six items rather than five on the Seder plate become common in the Sephardi world, not versus the Ashkenazi world? I'll come back to that in a little bit, but it relates to the two dippings. The first dipping is the parsley that you put into the salt water. Some people, by the way, don't use parsley, and I'll come back to this in a little bit, but they use potatoes. I'll explain why I believe that is and where people come from. But the karpas, it acknowledges that sadness is a valid part of the story, that hope is not it's not optimism. It's not that everything's going to be fine. It's an incredible act of emunah, of faith, of moving from beyond where we are to a sense that this moment and this emotion can be transformed. If you would move to the next text, please. The Tevla Bondi was a 18th century rabbi, and if you take a look here, what he does here is that he plays on this understanding of karpas as connected to the Hebrew word for mud. Um, now, if somebody says, "Oh, you're mud," or "you're dirt," that is obviously a negative connotation. And in some ways, what he says is that um, the karpas is not just a hopeful sign. He gives us a layered interpretation, which I really think is profound and worth talking about at a Seder, which is that things can have multiple meanings, that we can carry two truths. We're going to come back to this when we talk about the matzah. But what he says is it's the transformation from, in a sense, if you would move up the page a little bit, it's a reminder that the Israelites were humiliated by the Egyptians. Um, uh, Sheyisrael hayu b'Mitzrayim nichanaim tachat yadam. And so they were, it's a zikaron, it's a reminder of the humiliation that we sometimes understand. What does it mean to be the outsider? What does it mean to be, if you just go up the page a little bit, please, there, Rabbi Streiber? It's a reminder that we can understand what it's like to be um, the refugee, the immigrant, the outsider, the stranger. We understand the humility, the psychological and the social humility that goes with slavery itself. It's not just physical. But he argues here that it actually, now I think he's pushing a little bit, but it's still an interesting perspective. He goes on to other reasons. So why do we do it? By dipping the greens, it reminds us that when the person was humbled while we were in Egypt, we could we could lead to something larger and go to the next one, please, Rabbi Streifer. This is really fascinating. He makes an argument. Again, maybe it's a push, but it is worth talking about. It reminds us of the dipping of the hyssop in the blood. And so the question is, we don't do that anymore, thankfully. But what's fascinating about it is why did they put the blood? What was the blood of? And anybody again can you can unmute yourself. Um, by the way, Bob, the word for mud, it's not Adam, it's Adama is earth. Mud is a slightly different word, just like we do in English. But why did they use sheep's blood? Do you know? Do you think it was just random, or have you ever heard any interpretation? So there's two possibilities. Scholars are divided about why the sheep. One is that the sheep was considered impure. And if you actually take a look earlier in the Torah, one of the things that Joseph says generations prior to the time of Moses is that the Israelites should be in Goshen because they're sheep herders and they're shepherds, and they were considered like, ugh, like we think about pigs. That's how the Egyptians thought about sheep. There are other scholars who say, no, that's really not what it was. The job was impure, but sheep themselves were considered sacred and they were sacred animals. Whatever argument you take, what's fascinating about putting the blood on the doorpost is it's either the Israelites are being told at this moment, get some spine, get some backbone, and stand up for yourself. Be proud about who you are. And you're just saying one of two things. Either we take on what you hate, and you hate this, and we assume that this is worthy, or if it's holy, which I kind of like this explanation, we take what you think is holy, and there is a God bigger than you, and we reject that. Um, Go to the next commentary, please. And finally, why, related before we get to the matzah, why the karpas as parsley and why the potato? It depended on where you lived. Anybody who's a gardener knows that right now, if you're living in Georgia or in South Carolina, you can grow things that you can't grow in Toronto or in upstate New York. And the same happens in Europe, that in communities where parsley was growing already around the time of Pesach, where greens were starting to come up from the earth, then you could eat parsley. But in Northern Europe, those things had not yet grown. So potatoes represented in Northern Europe, and I've heard this from people saying, "Oh yeah, I grew up with potatoes." Um, and so in those communities, rather than parsley, they used potatoes. Again, it's about the power of where you live to just sort of just interesting background. But now I want to move on to another imagery of hope that is talked about, and that's in the matzah. When we take the matzah, we take the middle matzah, and what do we do with it? We break it. What we break it. That and so what I think and what do we do with it later on? We're going to come back to that. But what do we say when we break the middle matzah? We hold it up. We don't eat it. We don't eat it until later on in the Seder. But at the outset of the Seder, near the beginning of the Magid, what do we say? Halach ma'anya, the achlu avatana. This is the bread of affliction that our ancestors ate. And then what's really important, kol dechvin yetei v'yechol. Everyone who's hungry, come and eat. Kol disrich yetei v'yifsach. All who are in need, come and join us for Pesach. So what does this kind of say? Let me just ask you very quickly. You can unmute yourself or put it in the chat. When does the story of the Exodus begin? It's a fascinating question. And there's no wrong answer. That's an interesting question to ask at your Seder. When does the story of the Exodus begin?
Before we ever leave Egypt.
At what point, though? What's the moment, Sarah, where you
Well,
say the plagues, you say of God being abandoned in the basket.
Moses tells the people before they put the lamb's blood on the doorposts, that they
So you
will
think it's
tell
at
that
the
story.
you think it's at the last plague. Okay, Toby, what do you think? Unmute yourself.
My raised hand was for something a while back.
Okay. So Rabbi Schreifer says with the patriarchs of Day Avodah Zarah, we were slaves to Egypt. The rabbis in the Talmud can't agree. Manish Tanah Halayla Hazeh. So why should this time be any different? They can't agree on anything, right? But they have this argument. Some of them say it's as Rabbi Schreifer says, our ancestors were idolaters. Avodah Zarah. They worshipped idols. Others say it has nothing to do with this. We were Avadim Hayinu. We were slaves to Pharaoh in Egypt. In the Haggadah, because they couldn't come up with a final answer, they're both there. You're right, and you're right too. And so they're both there in the Seder itself. And what's powerful is that when we break the matzah, we actually incorporate this in a one sentence saying, everyone who's hungry, come and eat. It's about the physical problems that slavery involves. It's about the physical realities of being oppressed as a stranger, as a refugee. But it's not just that. There might be, there's also anybody who is in need, anyone who needs, come celebrate Pesach. That Pesach is not just physical, it's also spiritual. And in the end, it may seem that we are now, because we are in the Seder is the experience of being in slavery. And even in Israel, even if you're there, you say, Lishana Haba b'nei chorin. Even the land of Israel, even sovereignty doesn't free us from the spiritual servitude to whatever it is, power, military prowess, money, fame, whatever, our desires, whatever it is. And so we break it to talk about the fact that Passover is to try to move us about whatever it is that's tying us down, and that I feel like I can't get out of whatever situation I'm in. Passover says, you will, you can. And so we break the middle matzah to allow us a story of release, an experience of joy. And this whole, then with the telling, we begin to, our Mishigas, thank you, Sarah. So this telling, the Magid, is really about, okay, now at the beginning we're constrained, but we begin to tell moments of reflection, of freedom. So what are the ways of doing that? We recline like it's a remodel of a symposium. We tell the story of the rabbis of B'nai Brak who were up all night with conversation, a sign of freedom. There are many people who believe it's a political revolution, that sometimes you have to actually stand up to authority and you have to stand up to those who are doing wrong. You can't sit back. And when they say, rabbis, it's time for the morning Shema, like this is something that sometimes people will take out of their Seder. Maybe it's not, maybe it's really important not to. It's important because it says that power doesn't come from up top down below, but it comes from from us, and it flows upwards. And it's to talk about that, and that even in the midst of desperation, the story of God and the people and Moses, it offers a greater vision, a hopeful message that tomorrow can be better. If you would go to the next reading, please. And so then what do? We read Hillel's, we eat Hillel's sandwich, we blend the maror and the charoset. And I think in some ways this reminds us that we can have
Stairs.
we can live with multiple, we can live with multiple truths at the same time. I used to, many people have heard the phrase, oh, this is a perfect moment. So why do we call it a perfect moment? Because moments don't last. It's perfect because we know how ephemeral it is. And we recall in the midst of our pain that it when things are so desperate, just as we say a perfect moment, we enjoy that moment when it happens. But in our pain, it can end, it can lessen. So Pesach allows us the sadness and the joy. So let me just ask this. Is a meal without the telling of the story a Seder? You have a great meal, but no telling of the story. No, got to tell the story. So let me ask the opposite. Is the Seder without a meal a Seder? I don't have a meal. And the answer, interestingly enough, is no. Fascinating. Why? Because in Psachim, in 114b in the Talmud, the rabbis have this whole argument. What do you have? What do you serve at the meal? And they said you have to serve two cooked foods, fish and an egg, two types of meat. Go on a little bit on the page, please, Rabbi Streifer. And the final option that's offered, keep going, please. Um, you can even have a meat and its bone. So is there somewhere where it says beaten rice? If you could just go up a little bit. Yeah. So why do they have the argument? Why you think the rabbis care about what's on the menu at your Seder table? I don't think they care so much about the exact food, but what they're trying to say is when you have two foods, if you have this and you have that, I can say, thank you, I'll have this, but I won't have that. When you're slave, you don't have this option. What the rabbis are saying is the meal itself reinforces the message of choice and of freedom and of hopefulness that we will live in a time when we can make the difference. And so, why do they give this different things? Beets and rice, tofurkey and tzimmus, whatever. You can have whatever you want. Is that, in a sense, everybody can't afford the same thing. Some people can afford brisket and duck breast, whatever. Other people can't. Some people are vegetarian, some are not. So it's not about what exactly is on the menu. That what they're talking about is the power of our ability to be self-directed in our lives. Keep going, please. And I like this autonomy as the high level need, 100%. I'm not going to go through this, but if you go to the bottom of this particular reading, this is from Jonathan Sachs. But what he says is that something that I want to relate to the final piece that I want to talk about, which is what happens at the end of the meal. Remember the matzah we break? What do we do with the broken piece of matzah? We hide it. Who finds it? The children, who are the symbol of the future. They're the ones that open the door for Elijah too. Again, these are pedagogical, not just for kids, it's also for us. It's not just that these things are at the end of the meal to keep them awake and to keep them aware. Oh, the fun stuff's coming. Don't worry, the fun stuff's coming. But it's also for us. And look at the last thing. Sharing food is the first act which slaves become free human beings. Read this story. Download this passage. It's really powerful about how in the Holocaust, people never could share food because they had to survive. But once you have the ability to give to others, to create a sense of community, to build a covenant with those who are around and in need, you have moved from this sense of selfishness to selflessness and to community and to covenant. And that's why at the end of the Seder, we say Hallel and we say Had Gad Yah, where, it seems like a silly song about a goat. Like, this is it. Like, after all the loftiness of the Seder, we end with a goat story. Because what happens at the end, the Malach HaMavis, the angel of death, is destroyed by God. And that sense that does my life have meaning? Does this experience of my generation, will it live beyond me? That through memory, those who are called righteous never die. And that in a sense, it's God and this sense of God in our lives that gives us the hope, and that we end with the final words, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And even in Jerusalem, you say, L'shana haba'ah b'Yerushalayim habnuyah, next year in a rebuilt Jerusalem, always giving us a sense of hope for what lies ahead. And so it's not denying the sadness of the moment. In fact, we have to focus on it. We have to be in that sadness. We have to taste it in our gishkas, but that's not where we end up. And I like the Jews are the goat, but maybe I would say God is the goat. and the Jews are the instrument of that estimate of that moving forward. So I hope that gives you a sense of the power of the Savior, giving you some forspice, a little taste of some things you can talk about, and some opportunities for conversation. And I wish you a very happy Nisan.
Huge thank you to Rabbi Zeplowitz. This was really uplifting and meaningful. What you said at the end about sharing food being the act of a free person reminded me actually of something that Viktor Frankl writes, where he talks about those in the concentration camps who shared their food with each other, that they were able to find humanity even in the worst setting. And so I think it gives a whole different meaning to the act of sitting down and sharing food, bringing hope so that we can hopefully bring a better world. So thank you to Rabbi Zeplowitz. Next week, everyone, we have a very special session where our own Bruce Black will be sharing some of his poetry for Pesach. I'll help lead that discussion as we take a look at some of what Bruce has written and how we make meaning out of this festival. So we have one more week before Pesach, one more week before we sit down at our Seder tables. Thanks again to Rabbi Irwin Zeplowitz. I look forward to seeing all of you next week. Take care,
See you
everyone.
in Pesach, everybody. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.